Have you ever noticed how some children seem old before their time? Not in their appearance, but in the way they carry themselves, the way they listen more than they speak, the way they apologize for taking up space, the way they learn to read the room before they learn to read at all. There's something strange about watching a child develop the wisdom that usually takes decades to acquire. We call them mature for their age. We praise them for being responsible, for being easy, for never causing trouble. But here's what we rarely ask: what did they have to sacrifice to become that way? Because here's the truth. Children don't grow up too fast by choice. They grow up too fast because they have to. And the psychology of what happens to a child who becomes an adult before they're ready creates patterns that echo through every relationship, every decision, every quiet moment of their entire life. So what actually happens in the mind of a child forced to skip childhood? And why does that little adult become an adult who still feels like a lost child? Let's start with what you can see from the outside. You were the child who never threw tantrums. You understood when your parents were stressed, so you made yourself smaller. You learned early that your needs came second, or third, or last. You became fluent in a language most children never have to speak, the language of reading adult emotions and adjusting your behavior accordingly. Maybe you took care of younger siblings while you were still a child yourself. Maybe you mediated your parents' arguments. Maybe you learned to cook dinner at 8 because someone had to. Maybe you became your mother's therapist or your father's emotional support. Maybe you simply learned that the best way to survive was to be invisible, competent, and never, ever needy. Other kids played. You managed. Other kids demanded attention. You earned it through usefulness. Other kids believed adults would handle the hard things. You became the adult who handled them, and everyone praised you for it. So mature, so responsible, so wise beyond your years. But here's what's fascinating. Maturity forced upon you isn't maturity at all. It's survival, dressed up as virtue. The psychology behind this runs deeper than most people realize. When a child grows up too fast, what's really happening is a phenomenon psychologists call parentification, when the roles reverse and a child takes on adult responsibilities, whether practical or emotional. But it's more than just doing adult tasks. It's a fundamental rewiring of how you understand yourself in relation to other people. Here's what happens in your developing brain. You're in a stage where you should be learning that the world is safe, that adults are reliable, that your needs matter. But instead, you're learning the opposite. You're learning that safety is something you create for others. That reliability means you can never fail, that your needs are a burden others can't handle. So your brain adapts. It has to. You develop what researchers call hypervigilance, a constant scanning of your environment for emotional threats or needs. You become exceptionally skilled at reading microexpressions, tone shifts, body language. You can sense tension before it becomes conflict. You can feel disappointment before it's spoken. This isn't a superpower, though it might look like one. It's a survival mechanism. Your nervous system learned early that missing these signals could mean emotional or physical danger, chaos, or the collapse of your family system. And here's where it gets complex. To cope with adult responsibilities while still being a child, you learn to dissociate from your own childhood needs. You don't stop having them. Children can't actually stop being children, no matter how hard they try. But you learn to push them down so far that you forget they exist. Your inner child doesn't disappear. It goes into hiding. And this is where the real psychology reveals itself. You develop what feels like two separate selves. There's the competent adult child who handles everything, who never breaks, who exists to solve problems and manage emotions, yours and everyone else's. And then there's the actual child, buried beneath layers of responsibility, still desperately wanting to play, to be held, to be told that everything will be okay and they don't have to fix it. But you can't be both. So you choose the one that keeps you safe. You choose the one that makes you valuable. You choose the one that ensures you won't be abandoned. The message embeds itself deep. I am only worth loving if I am useful. I am only safe if I am needed. I can only belong if I never ask for anything. Years pass. You grow up chronologically, and everyone marvels at how well you turned out, how independent, how capable, how you never need anything from anyone. But the truth is, you never learned how to need. You learned how to not need as a form of protection. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with this. You can be surrounded by people and still feel fundamentally alone, because the real you, the one with needs, with fears, with desires, never learned it was safe to be seen. You become exceptional at giving. You can anticipate what others need before they ask. You're the friend everyone calls in a crisis. You're reliable, steady, strong. But receiving? That's where you falter. When someone tries to take care of you, it feels wrong, uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that don't fit. You deflect compliments, you minimize your struggles, you turn conversations back to the other person because that's where you know how to exist. Here's what's really happening beneath the surface. That hypervigilance that made you so good at reading others, it never turns off. You're exhausted in ways you can't explain because your nervous system is constantly working overtime. You scan every room, every interaction, every relationship for signs of trouble. You're always braced for the other shoe to drop. That independence that everyone admires, it's built on a foundation of terror, not the terror of being alone, but the terror of depending on someone and having them fail you. So you do everything yourself, even when it's slowly breaking you. That emotional regulation that makes you seem so calm, it's a skill you learned too young, and now you can't remember how to feel your feelings without immediately managing them. You comfort yourself, you talk yourself down, you rationalize away hurt, you're your own parent, even in your own head. The psychology term for this is self-abandonment. You learn to abandon yourself before anyone else could. You learn to dismiss your needs before someone else could dismiss them. You learn to minimize your pain before someone else could tell you it wasn't that bad. And the cruelest part, you're so good at it that no one notices you're struggling. You've perfected the art of suffering silently while appearing completely fine. And this is where it gets interesting because these patterns don't stay confined to childhood. They follow you into every relationship you'll ever have. You're attracted to people who need you, not people who want you, people who need you. Because need is the language of love you learned. If someone doesn't need fixing, healing, or saving, you don't know what value you bring. You choose partners who are emotionally unavailable, not because you're broken, but because unavailability feels familiar. It mirrors the dynamic you grew up with, you giving endlessly while your needs remain unmet. It's painful, but it's home. You overgive. You people please. You say yes when you mean no. You sacrifice your boundaries because boundaries feel selfish. And you learned that your worth lies in being selfless. But here's the thing. You can't have intimate relationships without being able to be vulnerable. And vulnerability requires believing that your needs won't destroy the relationship. But you don't believe that. How could you? Every time you had needs as a child, they were either too much or impossible to meet. So you protect others from your needs. You protect yourself from disappointment. And in the process, you create exactly what you fear: distance. Because no one can truly know you if you won't let them see the parts that need tending. But here's what nobody tells you. Underneath all of this, the hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, the independence that's actually isolation, there's grief. Grief for the childhood you didn't get to have. Grief for the spontaneity you learned to suppress. Grief for the carefree moments that were replaced with worry. Grief for the version of yourself who might have existed if you'd been allowed to just be a child. This grief is complicated because society doesn't recognize it. You weren't abused in the traditional sense, maybe. Your parents might have loved you. They probably did their best. But doing their best doesn't erase what you lost. And you're allowed to grieve what wasn't there, even if what was there was love. The psychology of this kind of grief is complex because it lives alongside gratitude. You can be grateful for your resilience and still mourn that you needed to develop it. You can appreciate your empathy and still wish it hadn't been forged in the fire of other people's pain. You can love who you became and still grieve who you might have been. And maybe you've never let yourself feel this grief because it feels ungrateful, because it feels like a betrayal of the people who raised you, because it feels dramatic to mourn something intangible like a normal childhood. But grief doesn't ask permission, it just waits. And it will wait for decades if it has to, manifesting as numbness, as detachment, as a vague sense that something is missing, but you can't name what. So, what happens now? How does someone who grew up too fast learn to live as an adult who's allowed to be human? The answer isn't simple, and I won't pretend it is, but it starts with the hardest thing someone like you has ever had to do. It starts with letting yourself need something, not earning it, not justifying it, just needing. It starts with recognizing that the child inside you who learned to stay quiet didn't disappear. They're still there, waiting to be acknowledged. And healing means going back for that child, not with resentment for how they had to be, but with compassion for what they survived. Here's what's fascinating about the brain. The same neuroplasticity that allowed you to adapt to an unsafe childhood can help you adapt to safety now. You can rewire those patterns. It takes time. It takes intention. It often takes therapy, real, deep, therapeutic work with someone who understands developmental trauma. But you can learn that vulnerability isn't weakness. You can learn that your needs aren't burdens. You can learn that people can love you without you performing for them. You can learn to rest without guilt. You can learn to receive without immediately giving back. You can learn that boundaries aren't selfish. They're the foundation of honest relationships. You can learn that you're allowed to take up space, to be imperfect, to ask for help, to not have all the answers. But here's the truth. Learning these things will feel wrong at first. Your entire system will resist, because everything in you was built on the opposite belief, that your worth is contingent, that love must be earned, that safety comes from control. Healing will ask you to do the thing you've spent your whole life avoiding, to be a burden, to be needy, to be the one who doesn't have it together. Even though you won't actually be a burden, you'll just feel like one because your baseline is so skewed. So, let's come back to where we started. What happens to a child who grows up too fast? They become an adult, carrying a child they never learned to comfort. They become someone exceptional at caring for others, while convinced they're not worth caring for. They become hypervigilant, overfunctioning, perpetually braced for disaster. But here's what else they become. Deeply empathetic, incredibly resilient, capable of holding space for pain in ways most people never learn. The question isn't whether you can undo your childhood. You can't. It happened, and it shaped you in ways that will always be part of your story. The question is, can you parent yourself now in the ways you needed then? Can you give that buried child permission to finally be a child? Even if it's decades late, can you tell them they don't have to earn love anymore? They don't have to be useful to belong. They don't have to carry the weight of the world to deserve rest, because that child is still in there, still waiting, still hoping that someday someone will tell them they did enough, they are enough, and they can finally put it down. So maybe it's time, not to fix yourself, you were never broken, but to finally offer yourself the grace you've been giving everyone else your entire life. You grew up too fast, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. But you don't have to anymore. And maybe that's the real beginning. The moment you realize that childhood isn't about age, it's about safety. And you can finally give yourself permission to be safe.